It is not those in favor of borders that are spouting dangerous ideas, but rather those that don't see the existential importance of borders at all. They are, in fact, an important first step in the dialectic process. And while there's always a leap of faith involved when you start this process, it is those that rather continue living in whatever frustrating or oppressive system for as long as they at least know it than daring to take a step forward into the unknown that are fearful and stagnant. Hello and welcome to the first episode of a new series of videos that I'm calling Building Blocks of Society. The title might sound a bit pompous, and I'll admit that I've been thinking about calling it Society Lego instead, but I wanted to avoid copyright problems down the road as well as confusion about what this was actually about. So, what is it about? So far, my topics have been rather specific, either a book or a topic such as Me Too, but also some specific news or the work of a selected artist such as Dziga Vertov. While I'm not saying that all that is going to be replaced, I really want to make this channel an experimental arena for sharing and developing thoughts and ideas that I feel can be of value for understanding and possibly even shaping our society. In other words, a marketplace of ideas. Although I'm not claiming that these ideas or thoughts are all 100% set in stone. Often these are ideas that develop from discussions or debates, and while I'm obviously committed to them to an extent, as otherwise I wouldn't share them, I'm far from claiming that this is the final word on these matters. Articulating them here is more of a means of engaging in another level of reflection, either by your feedback or simply by formulating these thoughts, putting them out there and seeing how my ideas evolve over time. So, more than ever, I look forward to any comments or feedback you might have. But now, without further ado, let's dive right into today's topic. To justify the grandstanding title of this series, I of course needed to pick a topic that sounds similarly pompous to open this series in style, even though the concept behind it isn't all that complicated and can be easily understood. Also, I'm going to use an example to describe it that goes back to the very beginning of life on Earth, so how fitting is that for an opening? The term negation of the negation goes back to Hegel, and is possibly most famously known through its adapted use by Marx, who used it as one of the backbones of his dialectic materialism. As most things with Hegel, it sounds very complicated, possibly even more complicated than necessary, as the concept in itself can be simplified to a degree that even a small child can understand it. The basic idea is that by negating a certain state, we leave that state behind. But by negating the negation again, we rediscover what was left behind, but on a higher level, so to speak. Contrary to the double negation in classical logic, but also in its rhetoric sense, we do not return to the initial state, but have progressed to a higher level. We have moved closer towards truth. It's also known as Hegelian triad, consisting of thesis, antithesis, and synthesis. From there on, it's rinse and repeat. So far, so simple. The concept is sufficiently easy to understand and applies verifiably to a lot of human experience and beyond. Truth be told, philosophers have discussed details of this ad nauseum, which isn't the kind of nitpicking I want to get involved here now, because what matters is the basic idea of this concept that is verifiably true and relates to experiences we all have had in our own lives. In fact, I want to show its applicability on a very fundamental level, thus showing how it can permeate even pre-human nature, and to ultimately show how it can also apply on a societal level. Let's imagine, for a moment, the very beginning of life on Earth. Chemical elements of all sorts are swimming in the primordial soup. It is the very definition of chaos as opposed to order. There certainly cannot be found any meaning in this. It is nature doing its thing, aimlessly, without any motivation as such. But then, the magical moment happens. The first cell separates itself from this soup. It's quite literally a case of God knows why that happened, as there are a few interesting theories on this process out there, but nothing definitive as of yet. The German doctor and journalist Heumer von Dittfurt did contribute, however, some important thoughts on the philosophical concept behind the ongoings of this process. This process of self-defining separation from the outside world and therefore putting order in place of chaos is the first negation. And it sheds a beautiful light on what the concept of negation can be, even for us humans. It is often the knowledge of what we are not that tells us more about who we actually are. It is the beautiful act of defining one's borders by determining what does and what doesn't belong. Amazingly, it's a distinction that not only dates back to the beginning of life, but that somehow a singular cell was capable of making, thus emphasizing how deeply ingrained this distinction between order and chaos is even in nature. But things don't stop there, because if the cell would just separate itself from the rest of the primordial soup, it might enjoy its cellular identity for some time, but soon it would starve to death and we'd be back to square one. That's why the second negation, the second step, the antithesis, the negation of the negation is so crucial and adds real beauty to this story. Because in order to survive, the negation of the outside world, the outer hull towards the primordial soup, needs to be penetrated again, while at the same time leaving the cell hull intact. The cell needs to feed, and it also needs to be able to move, to interact with the outside world so it can move wherever it needs to go, thus enabling it not only to survive, but to thrive. The result is a synthesis, which is distinctly different from the original state, where everything was part of the same primordial soup. Now, there's a separate entity, clearly defined as what is part of it and what isn't, yet actively able to interact meaningfully with the outside world. That is a different quality if there ever was one. It marks not only the beginning of life, but also the beginning of meaningful activity. It marks the beginning of distinction between inside and outside, or me and not me, as well as the importance of setting one's own borders in order to determine our identity. The cell itself certainly didn't think about all these things, but the process is there, and I think it's an apt description of the negation and its capability to describe meaningful development. Based on the story of the first cell, it is quite easy to find comparable examples of the negation at work in our own lives. Whether it is in debate, in a learning process, even in working out physically or in learning an instrument, few of us would dispute that the process of negating one's status quo can be an important first step to ascending to a higher level of knowledge or insight. While Marx did apply this concept to his dialectic materialism, few outside of his dedicated followers would think like that on a societal level. But if we assume that a nation, a society, is a sum of its individuals, and other factors as well, obviously, it seems legitimate to at least try and see what happens if we apply this rule on a larger scale, especially since this can possibly help us detect dishonesty and intellectual laziness in the public debate surrounding some of the issues at hand. Let's take, for instance, the many debates taking place surrounding so-called nationalist movements in Europe, most fervently right now in Britain with the possibly upcoming Brexit. Even though fear-mongering is supposedly a domain of right-wing populists, it is the media and the left wing that have been repeatedly summoning fears of what a post-Brexit world would look like. Facebook is full of supposedly funny pictures that suggest Britain would more or less fall back into the Stone Age by leaving the EU, with the EU and Europe becoming more and more synonymous for those in favor of the EU, I have even heard people say things such as, "I want to remain European" on the day of the Brexit results, as if suddenly the island Great Britain would drift southwards and dock next to Africa. It's quite frankly rather silly. The underlying fear, aside from immediate financial considerations, however, is that by leaving the EU, Britain would lose its open borders towards the EU mainland and would thus live behind a new Iron Curtain. Not only does this childish image ignore the fact that, yes, unbelievably so, transnational trade and travel did exist prior to the EU, but it assumes that anything less than the current degree of openness, for lack of better word, would lead to complete isolation. You can probably sense where I'm going with this, because quite frankly, it is not so different from the single cell defining its borders and separating itself from the primordial soup. And if you think that I'm therefore implying the EU is analogous with the chaos of the primordial soup, then you're very, very naughty. It's basically like some molecules going haywire because cell borders were forming, not taking into account that, of course, this negation is going to be followed up by another negation, which will allow for meaningful exchange with the outside world. As such, there is no reason to push the panic button if Trump wants to build a wall or if certain European countries don't want to give up control of their borders and the nation state as a whole. Once a politician, however, not only wants to control the borders but also cut off all interaction with the outside world, well, then you should be worried. But this has never happened so far, at least not in the Western world, and we also shouldn't mistake this for economic protectionism. Therefore, it is not those in favor of borders that are spouting dangerous ideas, but rather those that don't see the existential importance of borders at all. They are, in fact, an important first step in the dialectic process. And while there's always a leap of faith involved when you start this process, it is those that rather continue living in whatever frustrating or oppressive system for as long as they at least know it than daring to take a step forward into the unknown that are fearful and stagnant. The negation of the negation is not just a brainy term to impress girls at parties. Well, that probably hasn't been true for a very long time, if it has ever. But it's certainly something that, if used with restraint and carefully, can help us analyze and understand certain things in our lives and in society better. It's not a be-all, end-all trick to explain the world. It's not a world formula or something like that, but it's a neat little thing that is, after all, based on an important concept of dialectics. It might be simpler than it appears, but it's not stupid or even redundant. But if somebody assumes that Trump building a wall means that he wants to stop all interaction with the outside world, or that any national movement in the EU means the end of bilateral relations between them and their neighbors, and especially if someone steps up again to declare all borders to be evil because we're all humans, then you can easily show how this is a lazy misrepresentation of an act that has at least the potential to lead to a synthesis, even if it doesn't always work out. It is not those that take the first step by negating something that are lazy or fearful. It is those that rather want to remain in the soup because at least they know it. Even if at some point in the past forming the EU was maybe a bold step, a negation of what used to be the status quo before that, doesn't mean that this would be a final state to never evolve from further. We all know that empires founded to last for all eternity usually don't fare too well. The fact that so many people feel that their borders, their identity, and thus their whole being has been compromised is enough of an indication that another round of negating the negation is in order. A new round of negotiating the relations between the people of Europe after they have re-established who they want to be. If you believe that people aren't capable of sorting this out in a civil manner, and therefore believe that the only way of keeping things from escalating between the people of Europe is to keep them forcibly united under one large umbrella, then you are the misanthrope, incapable of believing in the inherent potential goodness of man, not the people you regularly insult as racists, Nazis, or whatever phobes. Also, you might know a bit of history, but that doesn't mean you understand it. And that's it for today. Thanks for watching, and let me know your thoughts. Do you have any other examples that fit the bill or possibly contradict it? Also, do leave a like and share the video if you have any possibility to do so. There's also a subscribe button here hidden behind the logo, so that's handy. And over here are 2 of my other videos that might pique your interest. If you enjoyed this video, that selection might be more down your alley than what YouTube Autoplay has in store for you. So go check them out and see you soon in my next video.